By the end of this video, you will know all of the main points in Angus Fletcher's extremely excellent book, Wonderworks. My name is Nathan McBride. I'm a Spanish professor and a scholar of literature and film and eco-criticism. Without further ado, in Wonderworks, Angus Fletcher describes literature as an invention. Now, most of our inventions are designed to deal with being human in a non-human world, to protect us from the elements, to help us procure food. Literature, he says, is an invention to deal with being human. Issues like loneliness, the search for meaning, the search for God, our need for optimism or hope or courage. And he shows how different literary styles and tricks help accomplish this on the level of neuroscience, how our brains work. In the introduction, he gives a very readable summary of some major points of Aristotle's Poetics. First, the plot twist gives us this sense of uplift, of wonder, when something we didn't expect happens, but we could have seen it coming all along. But there's something else that can do this, and it is called the stretch. This is when anything is taken a step further than normal, a narrative pattern that's made grander, metaphors. Whenever something gives us a feeling of something bigger, it's like a waterfall washing over us, this passive wonder and awe. There's another major point Aristotle makes in Poetics about our mental health, and it is when he writes about catharsis in literature. When literature helps us work through feelings of trauma or hurt from the past. And one of the major ways that this happens is through a feeling of self-efficacy. Aristotle called this anagnorisis. He calls it the hurt delay. And it's what we experience when a character like Oedipus in Sophocles' Oedipus Tyrannus suddenly discovers, oh no, all these things happened, and he feels the pain that goes along with that. But we saw it coming all along. It gives us a sense of sort of a God's eye view, of floating above the pain, of knowing that it was happening, revisiting our memories of the traumatic experience, but from a distance, and with the efficacy to be able to say, it's okay, I'm with you. And this is what the Greek chorus does for Oedipus in that play. Chapter 1, the Iliad, combines grand style and the war song. There are many kinds of styles in literature, and one is the God voice, the grand narration that says, let there be light. There's also something called a war song, or a paean, which is a song to a god. It turns out that neuroscience has shown that singing together group song in war situations boosts your courage, your power, your wanting to work to survive together. We're going to do it. The Iliad combines these two. Look at the first 5 words of the Iliad. Sing, goddess, of the anger. It is a grand booming narrator, but is a song to the goddess about human emotion and about war. Homer does this in his metaphors as well. He doesn't start with the human and then say, like an animal, Judah's like a lion cub. He does it the other way around. Like a lion, happy to see its prey, so was Menelaus. This anthropomorphic kind of metaphor stretches the human to involve everything. All of these grand things are brought to the human level inside us in the Iliad. Chapter 2. What makes us feel like we are in love? Well, there is a magic potion for this, and it's when someone reveals something about themselves, the secret disclosure. Well, that's not enough, because people can tell us things that maybe don't make us feel all that in love with them. The second thing is wonder. We see this in poetry. Maybe this is why we write so much love poetry. When the form and the style or the rhyme or the metaphors give us that sense of stretch, of wonder, while someone's telling us about themselves in the I voice. I love you. I can't say it because of the law. He writes about an ode from Eastern Zhou in China. And he also writes about the love poetry of Sappho, who innovates this one step further. She doesn't just disclose about herself. She rewrites the Iliad in her very famous poem about Helen of Troy, and she says, Helen wasn't kidnapped. Helen ran away because of love. She's disclosing about a fictional character for a different eye. And we see this in novels all the time, which can tell us exactly what characters are thinking and feeling. It can give us that feeling of being in love. Chapter 3. When does our brain know to empathize with someone? When does our brain know to let go of that sense of justice, eye for an eye, I'm going to punish you, and feel with the other person and forgive them? Well, the most surefire way to do that responsibly is when the other person apologizes. This can be faulty. Someone might not be telling the truth. So, when our brain chooses whether or not to empathize, it tries to figure out whether the person's genuine. And one way that we see this, especially in literature, say Oedipus Tyrannus at the end, after all these bad things he's done, he cries out, "Oh!" in pain. We also see it again as novels tell us exactly what characters are thinking and feeling. It gives us a glimpse inside their head to know, yes, they're really sorry. And this is good practice for us. It stimulates our kindness, our choice to empathize in the real world as well. Chapter 4. How satire can help us float above pain. There are 3 things that satire does very often. The first is, what's it called? Parody, that's what it's called, which is imitation exaggerated. The second is insinuation. Point 1, point 2, therefore point 3, haha. And the third thing that satire does is irony. A God's eye view of the situation that makes us take a step back and be like, oh, okay, maybe I'll distance myself a little bit from that. When Plato writes about Socrates, he realizes that Socrates is doing this all the time, but he's innovating it. And when Plato writes Meno, he's writing about a student of philosophy, Meno, who comes to Socrates and says, hey, so tell me about philosophy. I've heard these ideas from my great teacher, so I think I know something. And Socrates is like, oh, okay. Well, philosophers don't really know anything. The philosopher knows he doesn't know anything. But hey, so what are your thoughts? You're probably pretty smart. What makes this new is that we're not just laughing at Meno. We're laughing at ourselves. Because Meno is me. I'm reading this book because I think I know something about philosophy, but I want to understand. And Socrates is going to help me learn that I know a lot less than I think I do. Socrates is going to help me learn to laugh at myself a little bit, which is very good in helping us heal and distance ourselves a little bit from pain. And it's very good for our mental health in general. Chapter 5. The Tale Told from Our Future. Why do people believe in horoscopes or seek out prophecies about things? Because we want to know what's going to happen. Well, literature does this whenever it introduces a story saying, by the end of the story, you will know what happened. How can I tell you about everything that happened last night? Well, let me do it as best I can. This is how curiosity works in our brain. When we want to know, when we think we know something, but we're not quite sure, our brain releases a little bit of dopamine to make us want more, to make us want to know. Curiosity is good for our mental health. In Chapter 6, Fletcher gives a very innovative reading of Dante's Inferno, the first part of the Divine Comedy. He writes that, in the medieval ages, it was very popular among theologians to put allegory into ancient works of literature, like Beowulf. Insert this little thing that says, well, Beowulf, don't be too prideful, because here's your moral, and look how this reveals Christ and the ultimate truth. When we find this kind of a mismatch, there are 2 ways this can happen. Allegory. First is when we find something familiar in an unfamiliar environment, a Christian moral in Beowulf. This gives us a sense of being at home, a sense of comfort. But the other way around is very different. When we find something unfamiliar in a familiar environment, This makes us feel paranoid. You see that bug on the floor over there. Ah! Our brain tells us, pay attention. It makes us alert. This is what Dante does in the Inferno. We're reading a Christian allegory, very familiar, of hell and purgatory and heaven. And 3 chapters in, boom, there's Medusa in hell punishing people. What's Medusa, this Greek figure, doing there? Happens all the time in Dante's Inferno. Why is Dante doing this? He wants us to be alert, to be on our guard, and to think for ourselves. He's making us pay attention, because instead of revealing the secret truth with his poetry, he's making secrets more hidden, more mysterious, making us want to look for the truth. Chapter 7, The Fairy Tale Twist. Well, when Perrault wrote Cinderella, he gave it a very nice moral. This is what happens when you do the right thing. But the problem with that sort of just world theory is that it doesn't help us when we feel bad. When we feel bad, just world just tells us, well, maybe I feel bad because I did something wrong. No, what we need when we feel bad, to balance us out a little bit and get rid of a little of that pessimism, is a little optimism. And we find that through Deus ex machina, when a great thing happens just by luck or by surprise that we couldn't have seen coming in a story. It may seem like really bad storytelling when the girl buys the doll instead of food, but then the doll starts spouting coins out of its mouth. It may seem like really bad magical storytelling, but it actually makes us feel a little more optimistic about life. It reminds us that luck happens. Good things can happen. It also makes us feel a little humbler about our achievements, too. Not everything I did is because I earned it. It makes us a little more grateful. Chapter 8. Shakespeare had a son named Hamnet, who died. So Fletcher reads Hamlet as a meditation on grief, written 3 years later, a very mature meditation on grief, and a guide through grief. What does he reveal to us about Hamlet? Well, the reason Hamlet works, maybe the reason it's so popular, is that it helps us to deal with grief by doing the 2 things that we need to do in order to heal from grief slowly, a little at a time. The first of those things is to acknowledge the pain. This releases deep things in our brain from our amygdala and our thalamus, acknowledging it's okay to feel the sorrow. And the second thing is to remember the good things about the person we loved and lost, the good memories. And that releases a little dopamine in our brain to make it just boosts our well-being, and it makes us want to seek out those kinds of things again in the future. Well, we get this in Macbeth when Macduff says, first I have to feel it as a man, these memories of the ones who were dear to me. And we get it in Hamlet, because Hamlet is a story without a plot. When things happen, they happen by accident. The theater troupe wanders in. Hamlet kills Polonius not knowing it's Polonius. It just kind of wanders around for 3.5 hours. And it's like, what's going on? What's going on, Fletcher says, is that Hamlet is letting us spend time feeling the pain, seeing him feel the pain of grief, while all the while he's remembering good and beautiful things about the ones he's lost. How excellent, how beautiful their life. I knew him well, Horatio. But there's a second element of grief that we have to deal with, and it's guilt. Hamlet feels guilty about his father's death, or what happens if he doesn't keep remembering his father's death. And we often feel this way in grief, because guilt is what happens when we feel like there's a rift between us and someone else, and we want to bring it back together. But we can't. But there is a way to heal from guilt, and it is when we discover that we don't have to carry the grief all alone. It's not all up to me to make this person be remembered. And what helps us let go of that is when we encounter other people who feel it deeply, too. When we encounter other people who remember the love deeply, too. When we share that. Hamlet encounters this in Act 5, and all of a sudden his guilt disappears. He runs into Laertes, grieved for his sister and his father, and Hamlet says, here's somebody just like me. And as we watch Hamlet or read it, we have the same experience because we spend 3.5 hours with this character who's willing to feel deeply, who knows what it is to grieve, and who goes through it with us and finds hope and beauty in the meantime. Reviews can help us remember, so it's time for a pop quiz. At the start of this video, I said, by the end, you will know what's going to happen in this book. You will know all the main points. Which elements was I using when I said this? Was I using self-satire when we laugh at ourselves? Was I using the tale told from our future? Was I engaging your empathy? Or was I using the sorrow resolver that we just heard about with Hamlet? You will know all the main points in this book. That was the tale told from our future, because I wanted to make you curious to keep watching. So, keep watching, because we're not done. We got 17 chapters left. Chapter 9. What is paradox? Paradox is when two things that seem like they can't both be true are both true at the same time. We get this when we look at an impossible object, like the fact that I'm looking at this, but I'm actually not. When we look at an impossible object, that our brain, normally when we see something new that our brain doesn't take in, it releases this interest and says, hey, look deeper at this, figure it out. This is new, interesting information. These kinds of objects make our brain do that, but on a loop, because we can never quite convert it to 3D. It's an impossible object. So we just keep looking back and forth between the two options that somehow are both true at the same time. Literature can do this too. When we read that ice is hot, it's cold and hot at the same time, because it burns. It doesn't make us let go of the fact that we factually know that ice is cold, but it opens our mind just enough to realize, psychedelic, boom, wow, it's also cold, it's also hot at the same time. This is how paradox works. So if you want a little bit of wonder in your life, pay attention to these things that are both true at the same time somehow. Read poetry, like John Donne's, gaze at Escher's Relativity and Waterfall, or meditate on the fact that you experience the world with your right and left brain at the same time, or that you are body and mind at the same time. I dreamed I was a butterfly, and then I woke up and I was me. Or perhaps the butterfly is dreaming that it's me. But one thing's certain, that I and the butterfly have two very different ways of being in the world. This dream of the butterfly was written a century after Confucius by Zhuangzi, and Angus Fletcher says that this contains a remedy to our shame. Shame, he says, is almost always bad for us. It is those feelings of that we're not good enough. And it is deeply written in the back of our minds in terms of the things that we've grown up with feeling ashamed of that we don't need to. He says that guilt can be good, when we feel bad about our exterior actions. But how do we rewrite our list of what we feel ashamed of and what we can accept? One way is making friends with people who are different from us, learning to accept and empathize with different ways of living. And many centuries after Zhuangzi, Cao Shuojin writes The Dream of the Red Chamber, in which not only one person dreams of a butterfly, but a whole society dreams of being another society, and back and forth. And he innovates with something that Fletcher calls the equilateral love triangle, where the guy falls in love with two women, but they're both equally right for him, even though they're opposite personalities, opposite ways of being. Fletcher says that this kind of empathy with multiple ways of being can help make us more resilient and better friends. Chapter 11. Remember the Iliad in Chapter 1, the grand epic voice anthropomorphized and at the human level? The problem with the epic is that it can make us feel like everything in the world is everything we always wanted it to be. This is what Don Quixote is an irony about, the epic night stories of Cervantes' day. This is also the problem with romance novels, starting with the 1740 novel Pamela. So Henry Fielding wrote a satire called Shamala. It had some success, but then he realized he shouldn't just write a full satire. he decided to write a novel called Tom Jones that was half irony about the excesses of false expectations for what romance is, and half genuine, positive romance where we care about the characters and do fall in love with what's going on. Jane Austen was a big fan of Tom Jones, but she realized she could do both things at the same time: irony and care. She did this by something called free indirect discourse. When the third person narrator dips in and out of what a person's thinking, a character, without marking it off in quotation marks, narrating da 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 and da 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 da. In the middle, you get what the character's thinking. But Jane Austen's always being ironic about the possibilities of romance and the things that the characters don't see about their own faults and limitations. But by dipping into their thoughts in the meantime from this distant third-person narrative with irony, Jane Austen is making us care about the characters with the secret disclosure we learned in Chapter 2. We love these characters because we see what they're feeling and thinking. We get a glimpse in their heads in the meantime. So we're adopting neural duality of a perspective taking that's ironic and distanced, as well as emotional connection and care with these characters. And isn't that what love is, Fletcher says? Recognizing that the other person isn't just an extension of my own desires and whims and everything I always wanted. They're a separate person, but that I deeply care about them at the same time. Chapter 12. There were many Gothic horror stories in the time of Mary Shelley, and Gothic horror stories would often frighten us. Ironically, by starting off saying, I found this story in a library, which isn't real, but when you announce the story you're about to tell as just a story, our self and critical perspective dissolves, and we just lose that sense of being separate from the story and immerse ourselves even more in the flow. Horror stories, scary stories, have an appeal for many people, and the reason is a hormone called, among other reasons, is a hormone called cortisol. This is our fight or flight that it wakes us up. It releases adrenaline, it releases endorphins. And for extended periods of time, negative stress and fear and worry about danger is really bad for us. High blood pressure, anxiety, depression. We don't want those things. But we can also have stress that is called good stress, eustress, which gives you these benefits of cortisol without those negative health effects. And the difference between bad and good stress is that with good stress, we have some sense that we are choosing. We have some agency. It's not just being forced on us. We're embracing the difficulty or the danger. In Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, what she does from the creature, when the creature narrates and when Frankenstein narrates, is she breaks us back out. The creature looked at me, right, after finishing his story. And we become aware of ourselves. And, oh yes, I'm not caught up in the flow of this scary story. I can stop at any time. It's distant from me. I think a lot of video games have this appeal too, the sense that you can choose to stop at any time. You're choosing to engage with the challenge. Or as Dr. McCoy says,
I choose the danger.
Chapter 13. The scientific method is in fact how our brains learn. We have experiences in the world, we gather evidence, and we form predictions of patterns of how the world works. This chair is going to hold me up, because it always does. And if things go the way we expect, great, we have a reliable expectation. But if they don't, we might revise our theory of how things work. We might gather more evidence and figure out what went wrong. But we also have something called an ego that doesn't like to be wrong. It doesn't like to be shown to be wrong. So there are 3 ways our ego tries to keep us from being willing to form new predictions and think like a scientist. The first is intellectual insecurity. I can't figure it out, it's too hard. The second is magical thinking, when we ascribe things to something we can't possibly have evidence for, like that was just fate. And the third is confirmation bias. I don't like to encounter things that aren't what I already think, so I twist the evidence to be what I already think, or I just ignore contrary evidence. Edgar Allan Poe teaches us to think like a scientist in his mystery stories like Murders at the Rue Morgue, And he does this, first of all, by encouraging us to make predictions. We think we know who did it and what went wrong, and then overturning that prediction. So we have to think again, gather more information, form a new prediction. The second way he does this, and all sorts of fiction does this, is by transporting us to a fictional environment. Our ego has no stake. We have an open mind in a new environment. And if we're shown to be wrong, we're not going to take it personally. This is good practice for us. And we see this in all sorts of detective stories and shows. Chapter 14. Frederick Douglass's autobiography. First autobiography was a pretty typical slave narrative. This popular genre had two main parts: empathy with the oppressed and enslaved, and condemnation for the evil people who were doing evil things to them. So ironically, this was not designed to change what people thought about slavery. It was marketed to white abolitionists and confirmed everything they already thought. Frederick Douglass started changing his mind about some things, though. He started saying that the Constitution could be a document of liberation, and that voting wasn't just evil participation in an evil system. Maybe it could be a way to make a positive change. So he wrote a new autobiography, and he turned to examples of autobiographies about change. In St. Augustine's Confessions, he found a great deal of self-irony. We learned about this in Chapter 4 from Plato. Augustine read a lot of Plato. Augustine describes a great deal how, when I was a kid, I thought all these things, I had all these vices. Oh, I was so wrong. I've learned so much since then. The second model for change in an autobiography is Rousseau's Confessions. The exact opposite of Augustine, because he is describing all the different things he used to do as a kid, all of his different desires and vices, and celebrating them as different ways human beings feel and are. Douglass combines these two. He describes all the things he used to do when he was young and all the things he used to think, and he employs some humorous self-irony about himself and about the country that he identifies with. Both of these strategies can make us open to a variety of possibilities and to all the possibilities beyond, to distance ourselves a little from our perspective and be willing to maybe take another perspective. Chapter 15. From the Kesh Temple hymn to the biblical Psalms, we have a lot of ancient literature about gratitude. Thanks be to the Lord who founded the earth upon the waters. Gratitude helps us bounce back from failure. It gives us resilience. And it does this, in part, by taking our attention off of ourselves, where we're ruminating and feel bad about what we did or what they did to us, directs our attention elsewhere, onto someone or something else. And these religious examples go a step further. The Lord who founded the whole earth. This is the stretch that we talked about in the introduction. It gives us wonder, as everything we see is imbued with spiritual meaning and something we're grateful for. They combine gratitude with wonder, and this combination is even more healing for us. But if you're an atheist humanist, like George Eliot, you're going to have some concern about gratitude to someone who's above you, or who you're afraid of or you feel like you're indebted to, because there's no fear in love. So, George Eliot writes a novel called Middlemarch, and her third-person omniscient God voice narrator does something unheard of, utters the words, "you and me." This shared humanity bringing us together in a phrase that literally expresses the process of bringing us together, in a novel no less, which usually encourages us to read in isolation from other people. In the very last words of Middlemarch, after describing the lives of all these generous people who have died and been forgotten and seem to have had failed lives, George Eliot writes, "The growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts, and that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs." George Eliot is expressing gratitude for all the people that we can think of and can't think of who've helped make our lives better. This is also the stretch. It gives us wonder at all of humanity and all of the good that we have to be grateful for. Woody Guthrie does the same thing in his folk song, "From the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. Chapter 16. Unfortunately, we believe everything we hear. Every story that comes our way, we automatically take in. And this is good for us if we encounter something dangerous and we need to run away quickly. It's not good for us in the sense that it takes effort to stop believing something. We have to decide not what we believe, we have to decide what we don't believe. This means sometimes we need to take a second look, but we're biased toward our first impressions. So how do we learn to maybe be willing to change our mind a little bit? Julius Caesar gives an example of this in the speech Mark Antony gives after the murder of Julius Caesar. Shakespeare writes for Mark Antony, Brutus says that Julius Caesar was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. And then he repeats it again, but Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. And he says it enough times. With repetition, our brain has to revisit the same idea and revise what we think and think, oh, I have to accept that again. Do I actually think that? It makes us maybe be willing to question it when we repeat it. And the short story, Japanese short story Rashomon, and the great Akira Kurosawa film, Rashomon, which is not based on the short story. It's based on a different story by the same author. Do this too. They tell us something and we accept it, but then there's a twist. We see it again from a different angle and we're like, oh, why did I think that? The effect is something called alienation. This is different from the paranoia we saw with Dante. It doesn't make us question what we're seeing, but it makes us question our own thinking. It makes us think twice. It makes us take a second look at why we think what we think. Chapter 17. Virginia Woolf came head-to-head with a medical establishment that thought it was treating nerves instead of minds, and so prescribed a great deal of rest and not thinking and not reading. Turns out that thinking and reading aren't the problems. Our thoughts are a stream of consciousness, connected, not a bunch of separate nerves. And reading, when we read something we enjoy or do a task we enjoy, we get into a flow that actually calms us quite a bit. Virginia Woolf's era saw a lot of stream of consciousness novels popping up, from Marcel Proust's À la recherche du temps perdu to, what's her name? Dorothy Richardson's novel Honeycomb. And these have very long sentences imitating our stream of consciousness. The ideas are connected to each other and flow from one to the next. There was also James Joyce, who in Ulysses writes something like a stream of consciousness, but the ideas don't tell you how they're connected to each other. And sometimes we jump in and out of various people's heads, and you as the audience have to pick up the pieces and figure out what's going on, and you probably won't. Virginia Woolf decided to do both of these at once in Mrs. Dalloway. It's a great stream of consciousness with one character, what they're thinking, ideas very connected and smooth. And then in the next paragraph, she'll go into a different character's head and give that character a stream of consciousness. Fletcher says that this jumping in and out of different streams of consciousness, as connected, peaceful streams, is good practice in what is often called mindfulness or cognitive diffusion, or many other things. Taking a little bit of distance, being able to observe our thoughts from the outside. Because as we read Virginia Woolf, we become attuned to another stream of consciousness, and that's the narrator, the third-person narrator. It's practice, being willing to look at our thoughts and feelings with a little bit of distance, not be stuck in them, not be overwhelmed by them, as we often are in depression or mania or anxiety or post-traumatic stress. This sort of practice, seeing and feeling at a little bit more of a distance, can help to give us peace. Let's review, again, what we've learned in these last chapters, chapters 10 to 17. This time, I would like you to think about a character you like a lot. In a movie, a show, a novel, or a short story. I'd like you to think about whether that story encourages you to have any sort of distance between you and the character, or not. Does it do what Jane Austen did and express a little bit of irony about the things that that character doesn't see about themselves, while still caring about the character a lot? Does the character express any self-irony, like Frederick Douglass, in terms of how they change or what their own limitations are? Do we get a second look where we thought we understood what was going on, or we thought we knew this character, but then something happens that makes us rethink? Or do we ever leave their stream of consciousness and perspective and visit someone else's point of view and spend time with another character so we're not just always with that one character? I can think of no better example of irony about our characters' faults, plus deep, loving care for them, than
Winnie the Pooh, Winnie the Pooh, tubby little cubby all stuffed with fluff.
when we relax and do, nothing. Our brain goes on, playing, forming new connections between ideas, flowing from one to the next. There's an activity we can do to consciously engage with this sort of creativity, and it's improvisation. Improvisation joins that default mode network of our brain with the parts of our brain involved with structure and order. Hey diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle. The cow jumped over the moon. That nursery rhyme is a great example of what we're talking about. You've got total creativity. This and this and this. Sure, yes, and everything. But there's structure. There's a rhythm. There's a rhyme. When Lewis Carroll improvised Alice in Wonderland to some young friends, he created a story that was totally free, a totally free story world. It's all mad here, but there is some structure, and that structure is Alice herself. She stays the same. She doesn't change, and she can say no when things get out of hand. A. Milne's Winnie the Pooh does something more by switching this. Pooh is the freedom, the one who roams around and does whatever pops into his fuzzy little head. But the world is very orderly. The 100-Acre Wood is quite mappable, it's predictable, and it's rather safe. Some little bit of boundary, gentle boundaries, let us improvise all sorts of new adventures. Chapter 19. Our brain's salience network makes us self-aware when there's a conflict going on inside us. Two different things we need to sort out. It makes us aware of ourselves. Hamlet gives us a soliloquy where we have a conflict not between two different characters, but a moral conflict in the same person. Do I stand up for justice at the risk of my life, or do I preserve my life and endure the outrageous fortune? As we try to sort through his moral conflict, we become self-aware of Hamlet's problem, self-aware of ourselves as Hamlet. We identify with him. In Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, there is a lot of this going on in our identification with Scout, and Scout is doing this with other characters. She sees her father caught between his love for his hometown and his choice to stand up for justice. She sees Boo Radley, who wants to come out of his house and engage and doesn't want to. And she says, standing on Boo Radley's porch, I knew what Atticus meant when he said, you got to stand in somebody else's shoes before you can really understand them. In this moment, Scout is identifying with Boo and with her father, and we're identifying with her, identifying with them. This humanity connector, this putting yourself in someone else's place, is the way to justice and to love. Chapter 20. Let's say you've learned to ride a bike, but it's been a long time. Our brain forgets things a little at a time, and this enables us to relearn things. And when we relearn something, we learn it faster, and we bring our new expertise to the old knowledge. Poetry enables us to re-encounter things that we knew before. Take the phrase, a flower blew. This different structure of encountering the words makes us look at it anew. Kafka and Borges, in their stories, rewrite familiar scenarios and stories poetically so that we re-encounter them. And Gabriel Garcia Marquez does this in 100 Years of Solitude. From the first sentence, he's talking about remembering and rediscovering things. And the novel ends up giving you a history of the country of Colombia, but poetically, with magical or realist elements that make you encounter it anew. 21. Bias helps us make decisions quickly. But as you know, it can also lead us to make snap judgments that are not accurate. Good people, bad people. Well, the longer we suspend judgment, the more likely we are to make an accurate judgment. An activity that can train our brain to suspend judgment more is travel. In a new culture, everything's not what we expect, and our anterior cingulate cortex alerts us, hey, wait, things aren't what you expected, gather more information. Travel narratives could help us with this as well, but in the 1500s, travel narratives did not encourage you to delay judgment. They were written by a very confident, unflappable narrator who told you exactly what to think about things. So Thomas More wrote a fictional travel log to an island called Utopia, and in his novel, there are 2 travel guides with different perspectives. And so who are we supposed to agree with? Jonathan Swift, in Gulliver's Travels, gives us an unreliable narrator, a gullible narrator who makes snap judgments all the time, and then leads us into decisions that then we realize we can't accept. But you can still make snap judgments about these books. Well, Gulliver's Travels is all just parody, it's just satire, none of it's real. Utopia is perfect, so we're supposed to agree with the second narrator. That misses the nuance in these books. But another book that makes you deal with nuance is Ursula Le Guin's travel narrative, The Left Hand of Darkness, where someone meets an alien people and then comes back and feels alienated from human society, like Gulliver. But then he also feels uncomfortable with the alien people. He can't really fully accept their way of life either. So we sympathize with him and we don't. And it's like, what do we think about what he encountered? And we have to work harder to sort it out. Chapter 22. Nobody likes unsolicited advice because we need to have some sort of confidence that we can do it ourselves. Confidence that we can act rightly in the world and not just always need someone else's advice. So when you give advice, it's much more effective if you say, I see how creative you're being. That's great. And I think it'd be even more effective if you did this. This is called self-affirmation because you are affirming someone else's self. You're affirming something in them as you give the advice. This is most effective if you affirm their values. I see how truthful you are. I see how much you value your family. Literature, of course, is going to be doing that from the outside, telling you, do this, but follow your heart, like the old wisdom of Ptahhotep in Egypt. But the theater of the absurd from the existentialists went a step further to what's called self-affirmation. They removed all values from their stories and narratives. So you're watching this play, but it's not telling you what you're supposed to think. It's absurd. It's like, what? So you have to interpret it yourself. You have to be like, I liked it because of this, or I didn't like it because of this, or I think this is what it means. And as you do that, you're articulating your own values and why they're important. The reason this is important is middle schoolers were given the task of writing a 15-minute essay about their values and why they are important. That cut in half the number of students getting D's and F's, and the benefits lasted for years. This is how powerful self-affirmation is, reflecting on your own values and affirming them. This doesn't make us self-centered. I would have thought it would. But it centers us, in fact, to become more curious and more willing to change our behaviors and to grow. When Maya Angelou writes I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, her first memoir, and all of her memoirs, she employs something from the theater of the absurd, which she participated in. Wide changes in tone in the same paragraph, in the same sentence, all over the place. We're thrown into deep waters where we're flailing, and it's like, what am I supposed to think about this? and she doesn't tell us. So we have to do the self-affirmation. But she buoys us up so we're not just overwhelmed with the occasional third-person is statement, saying, this is wisdom, this is what I've learned, which makes us feel like, I know wisdom. She's using self-affirmation to support the work that we have to do of self-affirmation. Chapter 23, Catharsis, which we learned about in the introduction, the catharsis of tragedy, can help with the first type of post-traumatic stress, where our emotions feel out of control, the prefrontal cortex, which is a sort of brake on what we feel from our limbic system, the brake is just off. But there's a second kind of post-traumatic stress, and on this one, the brake clamps down and we don't feel anything. We feel numb and disassociated from our feelings or our experiences. There is a treatment for this, and there is another Greek tragedian, Aeschylus, who, in his place, follows this treatment, which has only recently been discovered. In Aeschylus's tragic comedies, there are events where it's like, what's going on? Hercules barges into a funeral laughing and celebrating because he doesn't know there's a funeral going on. And as the audience, you're like, is this funny? Is this really tragic? And then there's an uplift at the end because Hercules finds out, he goes to the realm of the dead, he rescues the person, and the funeral's turned into celebration. The treatment for the second type of post-traumatic stress is look at pictures of people with different emotions and identify, this is joy, that's what this is for. This is sadness, that's what this is for. And then, second step, to engage with something that involves positive emotions, wonder, awe, care. And the emotions don't feel so threatening or so distant, and that brake releases. In Alison Bechdel's comic autobiography about how she came to feel grief after the passing of her violent father, she does this too. She uses dark humor where it's like, wait, what emotions are going on? And you have to figure out what you feel about them. Secondly, then, with that, she starts diagnosing, this is where my father's anger was coming from. This is what those emotions were for. Then finally, she ends with a wondrously hopeful ending where she reconnects with the memory of her father and sees herself in that context, and there's a lot of healing and wonder that happens. Counterfactual thinking means imagining a different reality. I had to engage in counterfactual thinking to make this video. I had to imagine, what would it be like if this video existed? This is what I would have to do to make that happen. Fiction can give us practice in counterfactual thinking, and this kind of practice that we're going to see in counterfactual thinking transfers, it's been demonstrated, to enable us to be creative in our imagining and to take the steps to make that happen. It's a transferable skill. When we read something fictional, counterfactual, our anterior cingulate cortex, again, alerts us, hey, this isn't real. And when you read a bad work of fiction, it just does it again. Fake, fake, fake. When you read something that isn't real, there are some ways that comedies or fantasy, for example, says something that calms your ACC. And one is the comic wink. Break the fourth wall. And it's like, yes, we know it's fiction. We're just having fun here. Ha, ha, ha. The second is the reality shifter. You start in a real world, but then you expand the boundaries just a little bit, and it gets you imagining, oh, wow, maybe this could be possible in real life. Don Quixote Part 2, where he goes to a bookstore and finds Part 1 of his own book, which is real, but he's a fictional character. The sitcom 30 Rock for Fletcher does this by alternating between comic wackiness and the fact that it's filmed at NBC, at a TV studio about making a TV, this meta realism and on the streets of New York. He also gives the example of Mary Poppins, where supercalifragilisticexpialidocious becomes a reality. I think of Lewis Carroll's Sylvie and Bruno novels, or of the movie Up, where comedy or cartoon fantasy alternates with a very realistic, believable world where the wondrous becomes possible. Chapter 25. Our brains bond with music like a friend. And this is even more true in an opera like Monteverdi's L'Orfeo, where there's a lot of discord and dissonance, and then it resolves into harmony. This is because our brain's dopamine receptors just get ready for more and more. They prime us for more as we're waiting, and the gratification is deferred. So that then when the harmony comes, there's even more of a sense of bonding. Literature, he says, has done this as well. In The Penny Dreadful about true crime or vampires, or the pulp novel, or the novel The Godfather. There's this conflict and discord, and then there's a resolve at the end. But The Godfather goes a step further that makes you want to keep turning the pages, and it is the partial resolve. He calls this partial dopamine, because there's conflict, and then at the end of the chapter there's a partial resolve, but not total, because the total answer hasn't come yet. There's a to be continued. You want to see, how's it going to finish? This sense of friendship that you get from your favorite TV drama is no substitute for real life relationships, but it can help us with loneliness. This is how. Our caudate nucleus primes us to want to be social and rewards us for being social when we've been lonely for a short period of time. But if the loneliness just goes on, that flatlines. We need something to kickstart it. And engaging with fiction like this does that. And when the show ends, and it's like, I want to watch the next episode, that little sense of loneliness when it goes away, talk to the person beside you. And behold, you're being social because you feel like being social again with a real person in the real world. How do we invent like these authors? Fletcher turns to Quintilian in his Institutes of Oratory, who gives 3 pieces of advice. Embrace happy accidents. Imitate multiple models. And don't worry so much about doing what's true or what's right as about finding what works. And this is what that means. There's a long history of reading literature for what it means, interpreting what it says about society, and being trained to write essays that are argument essays. But Fletcher reminds us, from referring to Aristotle and the Sophists and his own work at the Narrative Project at Ohio State, not just to pay attention to what literature says, but also to what it does. Let us review with the Inside Out movies. These encourage us to rediscover our minds and our personal histories of growing up poetically, and they do it, Quintilian would be proud, employing all of the techniques we've learned.
Inside Out amazes us with its epic scale. It opens with a sort of let there be light.
And there she was.
But this is at the human level of anthropomorphized emotions. Sing, goddess, of the anger. We fall in love with these characters as we get a glimpse inside their heads, literally. Yet there is constant comedic irony, and this makes us laugh at ourselves a little, because we recognize these in ourselves, especially the extremes of joy and sadness. Notice how this scene dips in and out of joy and sadness's streams of consciousness, literally defusing us from the flow of our emotions. This is true for paranoia as well.
A dead mouse!
Great.
I'm gonna be sick.
When we encounter frightening things, the camera distances us from them, and there's agency to turn them off. The minute we might think Joy's right to have Riley just make the best of things, sadness makes us take a second look. As it turns out, sadness is good at empathizing with regret. The plot stops, and she just sits there in it. And when Joy opens up to admit the pain of her grief, the movie slows us down.
Do you remember?
We start to reflect on our grief with her. At the same time, we knew this was coming for Joy and for Riley in both movies. So the hurt delay empowers us to say, it's okay, we're with you. Inside Out shows there's not just one right way of being in the world. It leaves us with the paradox of a joyful sadness. In Inside Out 2, we again feel all the emotions of childhood and friendship, from discord to harmony to open-endedness. We identify with a character who has impossible decisions to make. And once again, cartoon comic winks are juxtaposed with a real-world setting where, wondrously, dreaming helps. What's different now is a mature Joy who can offer some self-irony about how she has changed.
Now, I know new emotions can sometimes feel unhelpful at first, and you just want to say to them, why are you so annoying? But I've learned that every emotion is good for Riley.
But this also leads her to make predictions that don't come true about how to deal with anxiety. Predicted solutions don't work out, and we have to review the evidence. Indeed, this film is all about the unknown future.
We gotta see what's in the notebook.
This central conflict plays out in a key scene in
Imagination Land.
One of Joy's greatest strengths is improvisation. She doesn't have the future all programmed out like anxiety, but this loosens her up to imagine a creative future. The story reminds us of the optimism that comes with unforeseen good luck. But uncertainty is still alienating. The first film kept us from making snap judgments by two opposite travel guides. In this film, Joy is out of her element.
I don't know how to stop anxiety. Maybe we can't. Maybe this is what happens when you grow up.
This maybe keeps us rethinking our judgments about anxiety, who is not good for Riley, but not just evil either. Did someone say remove all values from the story? This throws us into volatile waters of defining ourselves, but at best we come to self-affirmation to articulate and embrace our values, which produces a much deeper self than
I'm a good person.
This sense of self looks like it can grow, as it holds on to the old while rediscovering the new. Finally, both films end with gratitude for human kindness, combined with a spiritual wonder through epic stretch and paradox, music, and the heavenly glory of joy.
If you liked this video, first of all, check out Wonderworks. He gives literary and philosophical context for each author, and it's really easy and fun to read. Also, be on the lookout for my upcoming book, where I'll be showing some shared themes of compassion and ecology and a new hero's journey in some of the most popular films of our time. You can do this by going to my website, nathanmcbride.net, where you can join my free email newsletter for updates on my writing, and find my other videos, creative writing, and family movie blog. Be seeing you. Go with wonder.